Our next speaker represents clients in some of the most important and contentious cases of our time, taking place in legal history with his pursuit of justice. He has fought diligently to right America's wrongs. And when our sons and daughters were unjustly slain, he gave a voice not only to their families, but to Black America. His passion for advocacy has given him the privilege to fight for justice on behalf of the marginalized in our country, a calling to which he remains dedicated even today. Welcome, attorney Ben Crump. Ben, we are privileged to have you here with us today. We understand how busy your schedule is and how important the work that you're doing. So thank you on behalf of the Blueprint Men Summit for making time to join us. We talk about the police and criminal justice system. Is this where the problem lies, or is it with our legislators and the laws that are passed or not passed?
Well, I think when we focus just on the police in a particular city, we're focusing on just individual acts of violence against people of color, when we should be focusing on the big picture involving the laws and the legislatures. Because when I think about in 2020, when America is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, well, we in Black America are not only dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're also dealing with the 1619 pandemic, which represents the first year that enslaved Africans were brought to America. And from that time to this, for 401 years, we've been dealing with systematic racism and oppression. And when you think about this moment in 2020, where we all focus because the pandemic has shut everything down in America except racism and discrimination, apparently, we're in our homes watching the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery for jogging while Black. We watched the killing of Breonna Taylor, or heard about it, this sister in her own home being executed by the police. If you can't be safe in your home, where can you be safe at? And then we watch in horror as George Floyd was tortured to death with the police officer knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And then we saw Jacob Blake Jr. Be shot 7 times, point blank range, in front of his 3 children, his 8-year-old son, his 5-year-old son, and his 3-year-old son. And God knows what psychological problems those babies are going to have after witnessing the deliberate indifference of the police and whether their father lived or died when they shot him. I say all this to say that we have to use this moment that has all America focused on social justice against police against police brutality to make systematic reform and change the culture and the behavior of policing in America. For instance, we have to change this moment into a movement. We have to transform this pain that we all collectively feel into a form of power. We have to transform these protests into policies. And so in answering your question directly, it comes back to the laws and the legislation, because they allow the sanctioned killings of people of color because they say it's legal. And as Martin Luther King said in his letter from the Birmingham jail, just because they say it's legal, that does not make it right. You know, everything Hitler did to the Jews in Germany, they said was legal. That didn't make it right. Slavery was legal. That didn't make it right. Segregation was legal. That didn't make it right. And what they did to Emmett Till, they said was legal. That didn't make it right. And coincidentally, it was 65 years when they found Emmett Till murderers were exonerated, that the grand jury came back and announced the results. Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron saying that what they did to Breonna Taylor in her apartment was legal. And so we have to have the laws so they can't continue to say it's legal. For instance, no-knock warrants are legal in most cities in America, and we know they're disproportionately executed against black people. Our white brothers and sisters don't have to worry about the police kicking their door in the middle of the night. That's not their reality. The chokehold, like the issue that dealt with Eric Gardner in New York and George Floyd in Minneapolis. It's legal in most cities for the police to use the chokehold, and they drastically, disproportionately use them against black men specifically. And so when you look at the George Floyd Justice and Accountability Policing Act that's before the United States Senate has passed the United States House of Representatives, you have to understand that in that law, it deals with so many of the things that would hopefully prevent so many future hashtags, future Breonna Taylors, future George Floyds, future Jacob Blakes. But it is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk because the Republican Party feels that there are no problems with the police, and we continue to hear President Trump and his lawyer, the Attorney General Barr, come and say they don't believe systematic racism exists in America.
When we vote for our judges, most people know nothing about them at all because they don't get a lot of attention. Is this a lack of focus and attention to our judges, their background, and historical performance, intentional or part of a broken system?
I think it's part of apathy by a society who has been disenfranchised. You know, what we should do, the solution, because obviously there's a problem, we should work to engage our communities, to educate our communities, and empower our communities on who these judges that are sentencing our children to the school to prison pipeline are, and keep a report card on these judges. And we should turn to our leaders in the community, whether it's our civil rights organizations like the NAACP and the National Action Network or the ACLU, or whether it is our black lawyers and judges that are mainly represented by the National Bar Association. They should work with our churches and our business leaders in our community to educate people on who are these judges and what is their track record, and we can decide whether they should stay in office or not, because many times in these local judicial campaigns, the margin of difference between who is elected is just a few hundred or a few thousand votes. And if we vote, we can be the critical mass to decide who are going to be passing judgment over our children. And when I say our children, when you go into courtrooms, you see mostly our children disproportionately being sentenced to trumped up felony convictions, and I do mean trumped up felony convictions. So it is incumbent upon us to act.
Why do you think America consistently has had an issue with black men? Is this a long-tail effect of slavery, or is it fear of what you sow is what you reap?
I think it's a combination of both. You have to remember that America became one of the most prosperous nations in the world, if not the most prosperous nation in the world, at a very young age, mainly because of slavery and cotton and on the backs of black people. And so even though we fought the Civil War and we won the Civil War, there were still many who could not divorce themselves from this notion of this slave labor / free labor / now prison labor to help America be prosperous. And so what they did was figured out a way to have slavery by another name, which we all know is just the same when they started the prison convict leasing systems that now has been transformed to present day America, mass incarceration. And you have not just, the government as part of the conspiracy, but you have all these multi-billion-dollar corporations who are part of the conspiracy to imprison people were arguing slave, poor people of color, because they believe that is how they continue to be prosperous and compete with other global nations around the world. And so you have this system quite literally trying to create this status quo in the law that says we will look the other way as long as you keep populating this prison industrial complex, because everybody from Walmart to Victoria's Secrets is using cheap /slave prison labor to get the greatest profits that they can make. Just think about it. If you're a business person and you don't have to pay any money for the cost of labor, then your profits will go through the roof. And this what was slavery in a nutshell. And now when you think about the prison industrial complex, you have all these corporations still relying on prison labor /slave labor to try to keep their profitability, when they need to understand, as I articulate in my book, the fact that most of these other nations are making astronomical advances in education. The high-paying jobs are the jobs that deals with the sciences and the engineering and the technologies and the pharmaceuticals. And so these low-level, blue-collar jobs are not the ones that's going to allow us to compete with the superpowers like China and India and Japan. We need to, instead of having mass incarceration, we need to have instead of having mass incarceration, we need to have mass education for every American we can get, whether that's black, brown, white, red, it doesn't matter, because the high-paying jobs are going to individuals who have the advanced degrees, whether it's masters or PhDs. They're getting the $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 jobs, and what they're doing is coming to be educated in America, getting the jobs, and pretty soon they're going back to their native lands, taking the education and the money and the resources. So if we want to keep these jobs here in America, what we really should be investing in is mass education, not mass incarceration.
State attorneys and attorney generals have gotten more attention over the last couple of years than ever before. Most recently, the Breonna Taylor case is in the spotlight. Can you explain that process to our audience, and is there a next step?
I represent Breonna Taylor along with my great co-counsels in Kentucky, Attorney Lanita Baker and Attorney Sam Aguiar. And what we have seen is the consistent pattern of miscarriage of justice in Breonna Taylor's case, like we've seen in so many other cases. And Breonna Taylor's case is very significant because it highlights the fact that there continues to be this disrespect in American society, as well as in the American courts of law, for black women. Malcolm X said that Malcolm X said that the most disrespected person in America was the black woman. He said the most unprotected person in America was the black woman. He said the most marginalized person in America was the black woman. So in many ways, Breonna Taylor is answering the question almost 50 years later, is what Malcolm X said in the early 1960s still the truth? When we think about the fact that, like Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown did to bring attention and awareness that Black Lives Matter, in many ways, Breonna Taylor and Pamela Turner tragic killings by the police are bringing attention and awareness that Black women lives matter to America. And so we have to continue to say her name, all of our sisters' names, because oftentimes they don't get the same attention and recognition that even our brothers get when the police kill them. And I remember doing interviews on Ahmaud Arbery's case, and at the end of every interview, I would say, and we can't forget our sister Breonna Taylor, who was killed in the sanctity of our own home by the police who broke open her front door based on a lie. And so when we think about these grand jury proceedings, these secret grand jury proceedings, we have to highlight the fact that prosecutors, state's attorneys, attorney generals, 99.9% of the time, they can get a prosecution every day and twice on Friday. But it is only when you have a police officer who kills a marginalized person in America, then that system seems to be reversed. And it's almost as if they can never get an indictment to hold these killer cops responsible for these unjustifiable killings. And so we have to look at this grand jury system, this secret system that only has the prosecutor in there with the regular citizens, giving them the evidence that they want to have presented to them and giving them the recommendations of what charges, if any, to hold these officers accountable for. And oftentimes what you see is that the prosecutor goes into that grand jury room where none of us are allowed to go, and they present every bit of evidence to justify these unjustifiable killings. And it was highlighted when we were able to achieve something unprecedented in Breonna Taylor's case in Kentucky. And that is to have the recordings released from the grand jury proceedings. And quite literally, it confirmed our worst suspicions that there was nobody in that grand jury proceeding from the Attorney General's office presenting evidence on behalf of Breonna Taylor. In fact, when you listen to the recordings, and don't take Ben Crump's word for it, when you listen to the recordings, you hear that the citizens are advocating more for Breonna Taylor than the prosecutors, who continue to try to deflect their questions and just justify that the police should be exonerated. There's this one exchange that is extremely memorable when you listen to it. You hear the prosecutor, after he showed a few body cam videos, a Black woman says, well, do we get to see the other police body cam videos? And the prosecutor says, and trying to deflect from her question, that there's over 15 hours of video and that would take too much time, of which the sister retorts back and says, we got time. But yet they would not show them the remaining videos, and that's why we're asking in Breonna Taylor's case that a grand jury is reconvened and an independent prosecutor who will present the evidence fairly is brought into the case. But that still won't solve this whole secret grand jury proceeding issue. I believe the whole system should be overhauled because it's really about transparency. Transparency plus accountability equals trust. The problem that exists in America between communities of color and law enforcement is trust. And the only way we can bridge this divide of mistrust is to have transparency where everybody can see what happened. And if the police is at fault, they need to be held accountable. If the system, the citizen is at fault, they need to be held accountable. And then you got to have accountability. It can't just be when Black and brown people are accused of a crime, they lock our children up and throw away the key. But when the roles are reversed, first and we see with our own eyes, we have ocular proof that the police shot him in the back or the police used excessive brutal force, then they're not held accountable. We say that there are two justice systems in America, one for Black America and one for white America, and we watch this play out over and over and over.
With the burden of proof being so difficult in this current environment, what keeps you going? What motivates you?
You know, I'm often asked that question, you know, what keeps you going when it seems like the odds are stacked so high against equal justice for Black and brown people in America who you often represent and fight for? And, you know, even though we win all our cases, I'm the civil lawyer, as most good civil rights lawyers in America. We are private lawyers. The only thing we can do when they kill our brothers and sisters is bring a wrongful death or civil rights lawsuit and get the family compensation. That's all we can do. And we do that in every case. We've won every case. But it's the prosecutors. If you go back to your high school civics class, it is the government, the state attorneys, the district attorneys, the prosecutors are the only people who can arrest somebody and take away their liberty and put them in prison. So when these killer cops keep getting off, it is because of the prosecutors. And we have to understand that as a community. As Malcolm X said, if you're not careful, you know, you start cheering for the people who are trying to help get you freedom and start rooting for the people who are trying to oppress you. And so what we got to do, these prosecutors who come every 4 years and tell lies to our community, but yet they continue to incarcerate our children and let people who kill our children get off because they're this tough on crime mentality. Well, we got to hold them accountable. And when you think about this system and what keeps me going, it's two things. Number one, I look at my children and I look at the hope and the optimism in their eyes. And I am convinced that there's no way we can give up on them. And so if we say there's nothing we can do and we just need to give up fighting for equal justice under the law and equality for our people, then it's like we're giving up on their futures. And, you know, our grandparents didn't give up on us. And our great-great-great-grandparents out in the cotton fields during slavery, they dreamed about a day where I would get to be an attorney and you would get to be a television personality. And, you know, they dreamed about these days, even though they didn't have evidence that it was ever going to happen. They believed, they had something called faith. And so I know within my heart that we cannot give up on our children's future. And that's what motivates me mostly. The second reason is because when I was in my first year of law school, they taught us about precedents. They kept trying to indoctrinate it into our minds. Everything had to be based on precedents because we wanted to have rulings coming from the court today and for the future to be based on precedents so we can have consistency in the law. And they kept saying precedents, 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 only precedents. Now, I didn't accept that because I understood that if we based everything on precedents, then the United States Supreme Court said that I would be a slave if we based it on precedents. Remember, in the Dred Scott decision, the United States Supreme Court said that there were no rights that a black man had that a white man was bound to respect. So I didn't accept their indoctrination of precedents, but I did understand what they were trying to teach us, and that is based on precedents, it is a likely indicator of what is to happen in the future. And so when I think about the precedents of black people in America, I think about the precedents of how black people overcame slavery. I think about the precedents of how black people overcame the Middle Passage. I think about the precedents how black people overcame being labeled as 3/5 of a human being at the inception of this country. I think about the precedents how black people overcame the Dred Scott decision that said there were no rights that black people had that white people were bound to respect. I think about the precedents of how we overcame Reconstruction. I think about the precedents how we overcame Plessy v. Ferguson. I think about the precedents how we overcame separate but equal. I think about the precedents how we overcame Jim Crow. I think about the precedents how we overcame Jim Crow Jr. And I think about, based on that precedence, that whatever America throw at us today, based on the precedents of our ancestors, that we're going to be able to overcome it. And I believe that in my heart because we have precedents that tells us so.
What are some of the do's and don'ts for black men in this current environment regarding the police and the system?
As Reverend Al and my other good friends in the civil rights struggle have dubbed me Black America's Attorney General, and I take that very humbly, but also with a sense of great responsibility to help educate, engage, and empower our community. And as I go with Colin Kaepernick around the country doing his Know Your Rights camps with a lot of marginalized minority communities, I often find myself talking about the basics to our young people. The fact that the time to challenge the police is not on the street. It doesn't matter that they are doing something illegal. The time to challenge the police is with your parents in a courtroom, in the court of law. Because what we want mostly is our children to make it home to us safely, without harm, without being brutalized, without being killed. Therefore, what we should all educate our children on when they have we have the talk that our white brothers and sisters don't have to do with their children, is to remind them that when you are driving and you're pulled over, not if you're going to be pulled over, but when you're going to be pulled over, because the statistics talk about how blacks are disproportionately pulled over for routine traffic stops that others seem to not be pulled over for. We believe it's a form of profiling and pretextual stops. Therefore, if it's in the evening time, please keep your hands on the steering wheel at the 10 to 2 position. Have the light turned on in your car even before the police comes up to your car, to your window. Anybody else in the car with you, tell them don't reach for any cell phone, don't do anything. Because unfortunately, remember the Supreme Court says if the police say I felt fear or I felt threatened, they have a right to use deadly force. And for whatever reason, if a black man makes a move, the police feel threatened. And that is enough based on the law to allow them to use deadly force against you. When they ask you to get your license and registration, repeat what they have requested of you. You asked me to get my registration and insurance out of my glove compartment. I am now taking my right hand, reaching over to my glove compartment. And as elementary as it sounds, it may be the very thing that allows your young child, your young adult, to be able to get home without being killed. When they ask for license and registration, you repeat very articulable that I am going to reach in my back pocket because you've asked me for my driver's license. And I'm moving very slowly to do that. Officer, I don't want you to feel threatened. And they reach into their back pocket and give their driver's license. one thing you absolutely don't want to do is to answer any questions from the police. Tell them that my mother and father told me if I'm ever confronted by the police or I have an encounter with the police, that I am to call them or ask the police to call them, but I am not to answer any of your questions. And this is very important because you have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. And even though your child may not have done anything wrong at all, the mere fact that the police can twist your words to get a trumped up charge against your child, is better to err on the side of caution, to tell them not to answer any questions, that your mother and father have forbidden me to answer your questions and you have to call them. And remember, the police are legally allowed to lie to you. The Supreme Court has said if this leads to them being able to obtain evidence of a crime, that the police can lie to you. So you cannot trust the police when they're asking you questions. You should say that I want my mother and father, and if you're of age, you should say I want to have an attorney, which is my constitutional rights, to address you on my behalf. It is critical, because when you go in the courtroom and you sit in the back of the courtroom and you see how they're administering justice, and you see little white boys and girls have very similar fact patterns to little black and brown boys and girls, but yet they get a slap on the wrist and they're escorted out of the courtroom to live out the fulfillment of their destiny that God has for them, and have every opportunity at achieving the American dream. But then you see the little black boys and girls taken to the corner of the courtroom and they are fingerprinted and handcuffed and convicted of a trumped up felony conviction that they have to wear like a scarlet letter, have to bear a cross on their backs for the rest of their entire lives. Because in the information age, once you are a convicted felon, every time your name is typed in a computer, the first thing that comes up is that you are a convicted felon. And once you are a convicted felon and you are a marginalized person in America, your life is changed forever. And so those are some of the do's and don'ts that I would advise as Black America's Attorney General that we teach our children.
Ben, final question. Are crimes against ourselves making your fight against police brutality and equity in the criminal justice system more difficult?
You know, that's just a red herring when they talk about, well, what about black on black crime? There's no such thing as black on black crime, just like there's no such thing as white on white crime. Crime is crime. Most people commit crimes in places that they live or that's close to them. That is predominantly what the criminal justice sociologists have found. Black people commit crime in the black community. White people commit crime in the white community. But it's a red herring to try to distract us and to say, because the police kill us, it shouldn't matter that much because you kill each other. Well, why isn't that the same thing with white people? Well, other than the fact they very rarely kill white people. Because you have to understand what the American legal system says to the value of black life without saying anything at all, with just our actions. You know, even though black men make up only 7% of the population in America, because black people on the whole make up about 13%, and so black men at most will make up 7% of the population in America, but yet in most states, black men make up almost 50% of the people on death row. We make up almost 50% of the people who are in prison. How can that be? it's one or two things. Either black men are some terrible, evil, criminal-minded, thuggish, nefarious human beings, or number two, this is a racist criminal justice system that targets them. And I believe, like Martin Luther King said, that there's some good in the worst of us and some bad in the best of us. We're all just people. Black men and white men, we're people. And the fact that you have such disproportionate statistics tell you that this is intentional. And the fact that when you think about the two quickest ways to get put on death row in America are these. Number one, to be a person of color and to kill a white person. That is the quickest way in America to get put on death row. Or number two, to be a person of color and to be accused of killing a white person. The quickest ways to get on death row. The Innocence Project, which I serve on the board of in the state of Florida, says that there are at least 100,000 people sitting in American prisons who are completely innocent. And unfortunately, most of those are black men, because society has made it very easy, based on the media, to believe that black men are criminals. And so when, even though they have no evidence at all, predominantly white juries, based on what they see on TV, continue to convict us. Malcolm X said that one of the most powerful drugs ever created was television. He said because TV have you thinking things that you're not even aware you're thinking. He said that it gets in your subconscious mind what they're feeding to you and projecting to you constantly in television, that you're not even aware that you're discriminating against people, because now it's subconscious. And so when black men and women as well, because black women are the quickest growing demographic that's being incarcerated in America today, women of color, when black men and women of color come into the courtroom to these predominantly white jurors, even though there's no evidence that they committed a crime, oftentimes they're still convicted of something just because, I believe, the mere fact that they are in a minority. And so that's why you have so many minorities taking these plea deals, because they know if they go to the trial, just like the prosecutor is saying, and like their overworked public defenders are saying, there's a good chance you're going to be convicted even if you're innocent. And I say all that to say this. When you think about the statistics on death row and how quick it is for black people to get put on death row for killing or being alleged to have killed white people, when you juxtapose that and you have white people kill people of color, or more specifically a black person, there's no chance. There's no guarantee that they're going to get put on death row. There's no guarantee they're going to get put in prison. There's not even a guarantee that they'll be arrested based on these racist Jim Crow stand your ground laws that are prevalent all across America. And so, quite literally, what the American legal system is telling you is that the people we value most in America are white people, and seems to be the people we value much less are black people. And that's why we have to continue to say Black Lives Matter, because it's apparent from our legal system that black lives don't matter. And that's why we continue to fight against the legalized genocide of colored people in courtrooms all across America.
Ben, thank you so much for educating us tonight. You did exactly what I wanted you to do. It's been a privilege to have this conversation, and want you to know this: we are joined at the hip with you in your fight for our equality and our justice. Appreciate you.